welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, let's get started then. So our topic today is going to be child or underage crime, better known through the term of juvenile delinquency.
So, crime committed by individuals under the age of 18?
Yes, that is correct. So what kind of questions did you have for me today?
Well, the only real knowledge of crime I have is from TV. I love Criminal Minds, but there you don't see a lot of cases involving, children. So how common is it actually? Like, how often does it happen?
Yeah, well, TV can give a lot of misconceptions about crime and, criminal justice in general, but yeah, juvenile delinquency and crime is definitely more frequent than you'd think, but overall trends show a great decline in recent years for the frequency of that delinquent behavior in juveniles.
Oh, that's great. But, when you talk about delinquent behavior, is it just things like underage drinking and vandalism? Because that's sort of what I think when I hear about underage crime.
Yeah, that's a great question. So juvenile delinquency definitely covers topics like alcohol or substance charges and vandalism, but it also consists of other charges from assault or battery, theft, and all the way to criminal homicide.
Wow, homicide? Like murder? I guess that for minors the rates would be quite low for that, like real rare cases.
Honestly, yeah, you'd think so, but that's actually really not the case. Even though I was saying we've seen a great decline in that frequency of juvenile delinquency, while it's true for things like property damage, including vandalism, we have seen a disturbing increase in criminal homicide, almost by 49% in 2019.
Wow, that's scary. It makes me wonder, what drives someone to do that, Is it really the video games the media is always blaming for bad behavior and violence in minors? How true is that statement? Or is it really just a myth?
Yeah, well, I would say that a lot of people like to blame video games for that delinquent behavior and violence specifically, and a part of that is true, and a part of it isn't. Obviously, if you play video games like Call of Duty or GTA, it doesn't mean that 100%, without a doubt, you're going to turn into some kind of violent criminal. We know that millions of people play these games, but we don't see millions of bad offenders, right? Especially in adolescence.
Right.
That said, though, that exposure to violence isn't something we can completely eliminate from the equation. Research has shown that chronic exposure to media violence does result in the development of more aggressive personalities, and individuals who have repeatedly experienced situations that provoke aggressive thoughts gradually develop and reinforce aggression-related knowledge structures. The repeated activation of these knowledge structures result in a higher accessibility and thus higher likelihood of them being used in social situations. In particular, repeated exposure to media violence may result in a decreased attention to violence, a more positive attitude towards violence, and increased antisocial behaviors such as aggression and delinquency.
That's interesting. I always thought that the video games causing violence thing was a myth.
Honestly, yeah, for the most part it is. Obviously, video games do not cause young people to be violent. It's just one of the many risk factors that can contribute to a juvenile's aggressive behavior.
Interesting. So, what is a risk factor?
Well, it kind of sort of defines itself. In this context, a risk factor is just one of the many things that would contribute to the risk of a juvenile committing a crime.
Okay, I understand. So, other than something like exposure to violence, what other sort of risk factors exist in the case of juvenile delinquency?
Yeah, there are a lot of factors. So some are biological. So, for example, if a juvenile has a family history of alcoholism, then that individual might have a higher risk for underage drinking or other substance abuse related charges. Other than that, other things might include family dynamics. Through a lot of research done over the years, there isn't a special highlight in family conflict and dysfunction as a significant risk factor for juvenile delinquency. And neglect and maltreatment during childhood were found to be risk factors for delinquent behavior as well.
Wow, that's kind of sad. So a lot of it has to do with that home environment?
Yeah, that's what the research shows, but I do want to remind you, of course, not everyone who experiences these things enter into the system. However, it's just that most people who do enter the system have experienced a lot of these things, these risk factors. So while of course that home life is important, other factors exist as well. Something that is more surprising is that ADHD tends to be quite the risk factor for juveniles as well.
I see. These are just things that help to explain a person, in this case, a juvenile's reasons for offending. Could you tell me more about this ADHD risk factor?
Yeah, so I'm sure you're aware of what ADHD is, but if you don't, I'll briefly explain. ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's an extremely common disorder that basically just affects a person's hyperactivity, their ability to focus, and their impulsivity. Problems with impulsivity and self-control are the core problem in ADHD and hence cause the greatest degree of impairment, as individuals with ADHD often make decisions impulsively. And this might be why we see a lot of juveniles who have offended with ADHD. These problems with impulsivity can lead to delinquent behavior, especially when paired with other risk factors.
I see. So, how do we help these kids with high risk factors?
Well, it sort of depends. There are a lot of intervention programs for juveniles who have only offended once, something non-violent. A lot of these programs have a lot to do with therapy, specifically systemic therapy for serious juvenile offenders. Keeping them in the community with intensive intervention can significantly reduce recidivism. And when there is recidivism, it is less severe. And this kind of therapy can be targeted for a lot of different things, which designs specific intervention strategies to target the prioritized fit factors. So, for example, if a juvenile was facing substance abuse charges or struggling with some substance abuse issues, multi-systemic therapy that specifically targets substance abuse becomes especially effective.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, thank you so much for talking to me about this. Hopefully we can keep getting juveniles the help and intervention they need to keep those delinquency rates low.
Yeah, of course, thank you for being here. It's important to spread awareness about these issues.